Mastering the Environment through Audition, Kinesthesia, and Cognition, and O&M Approach to Training for Guide Dog Travel. Written by Hélène Guérette and Carole Zabiello, specialists in orientation and mobility, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Presented by Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Published by AFB Press. Introduction.
The Rehabilitation Center, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille, established a close relationship with the Mira Guide Dog School from the school's very beginning in Quebec in 1980. Specialists in orientation and mobility became involved in the new project. From this cooperation emerged a common philosophy. Solid training in orientation and mobility is essential to efficient guide dog travel. Over a period of time, orientation and mobility specialists developed a training program specifically designed with the characteristics of guide dog travel in mind. During training, different tools are used, including the white cane. Even in a program designed for persons who will use a guide dog, the white cane remains a preferred tool for integrating and putting learned principles into practice. It is also beneficial in developing self-assurance in travel. However, the cane is used in a decidedly different manner. At no time is it used to gather tactile information to establish and direct one's position in space. Rather, various strategies are employed to eliminate tactile input while amplifying auditory intake. We'll now look more closely at the various stages of training as experienced through the participation of 4 students. As you'll see, these adults have the opportunity, if they wish, to receive training based on more than their current environment. Other important factors to be considered are age, potential travel ability, needs, and present and future motivations. A global approach will allow them to travel in different environments, ranging from simple to complex, from familiar to unfamiliar. The program also addresses clients with different types of needs, or with more limited capacities. Application of the program then differs accordingly, but the objective is the same: to give each client, whatever his potential, the chance to develop capacities to the maximum. This enables the individual to play an active role in guide dog travel and use it with considerable efficiency. For purposes of clarity, this video presentation is divided in 4 stages. In actual practice, however, the stages are not so clearly divided. The 4 students participating here have recently become totally blind.
Part 1. Development of a set of skills: audition, kinesthesia, distance estimation, orientation in an indoor environment.
Now let's have a look at training in an indoor environment. The goal of indoor training is to develop a set of auditory and kinesthetic skills, as well as judgment of distance, spatial representation, and orientation skills. These skills are developed using the sighted guide technique. Parallel to these exercises, the white cane is introduced, making sure first to develop suitable posture, straight line projection, and a satisfactory level of physical ease. These aspects need to be sufficiently reinforced before progressing to other cane travel objectives. At the beginning of training, auditory and kinesthetic skills are worked on hand in hand. The instructor evaluates the student's capacity to follow the instructor's movements while maintaining an appropriate position during travel and in a variety of travel situations. Keeping in step is essential for guide dog travel. and must improve in situations where the student oversteps or has difficulty conforming to changes in pace or direction. The student develops a range of auditory skills, learning to detect openings and recognize different corridors and open spaces. The student learns to use available auditory cues and landmarks useful to orientation in travel. The student must also develop capacities for mental representation of new environments. Frequent use of tactile maps helps construct an exact mental image of environments, such as buildings or other areas to be traveled. Later on, practical exercises are introduced, where the student must direct the guide by giving precise directions to reach a desired destination. This is an excellent exercise for acquainting the student with the process of establishing and directing oneself in space by making maximum use of auditory and kinesthetic skills, and also of his judgment of distance without tactile feedback. The white cane is introduced parallel to the guided exercises. The first step is for the student to acquire and maintain suitable posture, then progressively develop the ability to walk in a straight line and attain a satisfactory level of physical ease. To facilitate development of these aspects, travel is limited to simple exercises, unrelated to a specific route. This keeps the student focused solely on these aspects and their development. Once they're sufficiently reinforced, we gradually integrate into cane travel exercises working on auditory, distance judging, and orientation skills. Trailing with the cane to reach an objective is avoided. Instead, the student is encouraged to enhance his kinesthetic capacities in conjunction with the use of auditory landmarking, two essential elements for good spatial orientation with a guide dog. The student is now able to travel independently and plan and execute different routes, from the simplest to the most complex. During travel, the student now automatically uses available auditory cues and landmarks and shows a good capacity to estimate distances. He also makes turns with precision, maintains good spatial orientation, and tends to avoid tactile information in travel.
Part 2. Development of a set of skills in an outdoor environment while using the human guide.
In the first stage of outdoor training, the student develops listening and analysis skills by constantly referring to sound, both when in motion and when stopped. The student is thus trained to use sound as the main reference in different travel situations. This prepares him to integrate sound in travel with the cane. Parallel to auditory training, we continue to assist in developing physical ease, which involves a suitable posture, natural gait, and the ability to project a straight line of direction without using the cane. Training begins on a residential type street, but one selected for a constant traffic flow and without a parking lane. When the student is just starting to learn listening skills, the absence of a parking lane enables him to be nearer the cars and thus nearer the sound. This proximity helps the student to be connected to the sound more easily. In the effort to help the student stay focused on the line of sound created by the parallel traffic we first make him aware of the distance separating him from the line of sound. The student can be taught to assess the distance quite concretely by teaching him to recognize whether or not a parking lane is present. Such as here, showing him that the street does not have a parking lane. By learning to listen and compare different streets, the student will eventually be able to determine for himself whether or not a parking lane exists. Once acquired, the concept can be generalized and applied to the totality of streets traveled. We believe a better capacity to estimate the distance separating the student from moving traffic contributes to increased vigilance in travel. The instructor continues teaching awareness to the line of sound by introducing the concept of parallel alignment. She explains the conventional methods and also angles the student toward the traffic or toward the residences so that he can notice the difference in regard to sound when alignment is correct or incorrect. Gradually, the student must be able to move from an incorrect position to a correct one without assistance. By and by, the capacity to refer to sound when in a static position will gradually lead to doing so in motion. So the student is guided while keeping concentration on the traffic and its trajectory. We begin travel by remaining parallel to the line of sound. After that, the student will learn to perceive auditively any variation from the line of sound, whether moving closer to it or farther from it. The student learns to read the intensity of the sound, which increases or decreases when he goes closer to or farther from the line of sound. The student is also introduced to return toward sound exercises. He is deliberately placed some distance away from the traffic and gradually learns to use the traffic sound to return to the sidewalk safely without accidentally stepping into the street. Mastering this ability is essential to ensure an adequate level of safety and efficiency in different travel situations. This exercise needs to be performed frequently throughout training to ensure an adequate level of skill. During travel where the student is guided, the instructor introduces exercises aimed at improving the student's capacity to estimate the distances traveled or to be traveled in a city block, beginning with shorter blocks. The student will then need to combine the ability to judge distances with the perception of information given by automotive traffic, such as a car slowing down or turning on a perpendicular street, to inform the instructor of the approach to an intersection. Reinforcing these two skills will improve the student's capacity to perceive the approach of an intersection. When analyzing intersections, we also teach the student how to estimate the width of streets to cross. This ability must be developed as it provides important information, allowing the student to react appropriately when crossing a street. In resume, when developing a combination of auditory skills, it's important to remember that two aspects must be considered: development of the listening faculty and analysis when the student is still, but also the ability to listen and constantly refer to sound when in motion. The latter aspect is usually underdeveloped and yet of vital importance, and so worth taking time with if the student is to be able to use sound to establish and direct himself in space when traveling with a guide dog. In parallel to hearing-based exercises, we continue reinforcing the following elements outdoors: posture, natural gait, physical ease, and a straight line of direction. These exercises need to be done in a calm, obstacle-free environment so that the student, who must travel without a cane, can feel at ease. In this exercise, the student points toward the instructor, projecting a straight line. Without verbal coaching, he tries to reach the instructor, traveling in a straight line. The distance is gradually increased as the student's performance improves. Walking exercises also allow development of strategies to attenuate or correct well-defined deviations. They contribute to reinforcement of a natural gait and increase self-assurance. Later on in the learning process, on quiet streets or streets without traffic, he'll be better prepared to maintain a straight line.
Part 3. Integration of the instructed skills through independent travel.
This stage of training is focused on gradually integrating auditory abilities in independent travel. The work environment is the same as the preceding stage. Travel is rectilinear, and simple street crossings are introduced first, then double crossings. Standard orientation skills will of course be integrated in training, but the student is not required to concentrate on mental representation of specific routes. When the student begins independent travel, he must have the ability to refer to the line of sound when in motion, both for establishing and directing himself in space, and also maintaining a straight line. In the first exercises, to limit tactile intake, the arc technique is not used. The student keeps the cane in front of him, the instructor staying close by to ensure safety. In the beginning, when the student is uncertain of his direction, we advise him to stop, listen, and correct his direction if needed. When he deviates in the presence of parallel traffic without realizing it, he is stopped in order to detect the deviation and correct it. After a while, he will be able to perceive deviations himself and resume the line of direction without needing to stop. This exercise requires a good amount of concentration and effort, but by and by, as he progresses, reference to the line of sound will come naturally in travel. For persons whose blindness is recent, learning to keep a perfectly straight line in travel is often arduous at the beginning of training. Development of this aspect is essential for acquiring greater efficiency while traveling. Next, the arc technique is integrated in training, while continuing to reinforce the ability to follow the line of sound. As the student continues working on referring to the line of sound when in motion, the instructor reinforces the ability to estimate distance when the student is traveling between two intersections. Now that he travels independently, the student learns the average amount of time required to walk a city block. When he thinks he's traveled half a block, he informs the instructor. Good estimation of the distance between intersections prevents frequent stopping in places where a driveway might give the student the impression he had reached the intersection. He will thus travel with more self-assurance and will more easily detect nearness of an intersection by means of available auditory input. The instructor will also continue to integrate return toward sound exercises with each lesson. The student has precise instructions to follow. He must estimate in reference to the nearest stream of traffic. This ensures the most accurate assessment. During the exercise, the student is counseled to stop whenever auditory information is insufficient. The student is then introduced to perpendicular alignments, and this exercise is integrated in travel, first between two intersections. With frequent repetition, the student quickly acquires greater precision. Once the student is able to make simple intersection analyses, execute exact parallel alignments, and cross the street at the proper time while maintaining a straight line, we introduce double street crossings. He must make a double crossing at intersections regulated by stop signs or traffic lights. This exercise allows development and refinement of intersection analysis, parallel alignment, acute turns, perpendicular alignment, and walking against oncoming traffic. Next, the student goes from a street without a parking lane to a street with a parking lane. He'll then have the opportunity to integrate the concept of a street either with or without a parking lane. He must become accustomed to walking on the street while being farther away from the line of sound. The intended result is to be able to apply already acquired abilities in this new environment.
Part 4. Introduction of the Dog Simulator. Overview of the acquired skills in unfamiliar environments through independent travel.
In the preceding stage, the student had to develop kinesthetic, auditory, and distance judging abilities. Travel was basically rectilinear and simple in terms of representation. The student now has a solid base, allowing him to focus on more complex travel in terms of spatial representation and orientation. He will need to travel in one or more areas and develop an accurate mental representation. He needs to plan out different routes and execute them accurately. He will also need to solve drop-off exercises. In parallel to travel with the cane, we introduce what we call the modified sighted guide technique, which simulates travel with a guide dog. This mode of travel allows the student to develop and refine awareness of movement in space. With the modified sighted guide technique, he learns to properly follow the movements and also to remain aware of his course of direction to maintain orientation. The modified sighted guide technique plays the same role as a harness, which relays information during travel. To receive the information relayed, the student must learn to keep a light pull on the harness when he's in motion. This ability is often difficult to master, but it is nonetheless essential for the student to receive the information, allowing to coordinate his movements with those of the dog. We then make sure that he maintains a suitable travel position and adjusts well to slowing down and avoiding obstacles. Through these exercises, the student develops flexibility, balance, and ease in following and adjusting to movement. But is the student able to recognize a change in direction? To differentiate between going around an obstacle and changing direction? He must develop a good awareness of movement in space in order to stay well-oriented. Is he able to blend this awareness of movement with auditory input when traveling to establish and direct himself in space? In the context of different routes, the instructor checks these aspects with test situations. These are situations likely to occur when learning to travel with a guide dog. In calm surroundings with intermittent traffic, the student must rely almost entirely on his kinesthetic abilities to perceive the difference between traveling in a straight line and a gradual deviation to the left or right, arriving at an intersection at an angle, an incorrect turn, crossing a street diagonally. In areas where automobile traffic is constant, the student will then be able to use kinesthetic and auditory input combined with good judgment of distances to constantly check his position and direction in space. He will have to be able to notice and correct a change in direction without stopping at an intersection. Crossing a street without stopping at the intersection. And an incorrect street crossing. Travel exercises with the cane, meanwhile, will take place in gradually more complex environments. The student must now integrate in independent travel the entirety of learned abilities. The capacity to maintain a straight line without reference to the tactile element will be an asset in more complex environments. Continuous reference to sound will serve equally for crossing open spaces with ease returning to the sidewalk safely, auditory perception of an approaching intersection, crossing wide streets with ease, perceiving a car turning during a street crossing, and maintaining or correcting the line of direction when crossing a wide street. The student is now ready to transfer the various skills to travel with a guide dog. In conclusion, orientation and mobility training designed for persons desiring to travel with the guide dog should have the following characteristics. As this mode of travel does not allow physical contact with the immediate environment, maximal development of auditory and kinesthetic abilities is primal. Development of the tactile dimension is not pertinent, as it is not useful in guide dog travel, and can even reduce potential development of auditory abilities. Training must also give the individual the ability to perceive and decode movements initiated by the dog to remain continuously well-oriented. Good spatio-temporal awareness must also be ensured. As the dog often travels at a fairly good pace, it is important for the person to learn to estimate distance traveled in terms of time gone by, so as to always be able to establish his position correctly. Equipped with this O&M knowledge base, the person is now ready to receive a guide dog. The training will provide assurance that when traveling with the dog, he will always remain in control of the situation, the dog subordinate to his master in perfect symbiosis. Travel will be done safely, the person demonstrating considerable vigilance and self-assurance. The scenes you have just witnessed have depicted persons traveling with manifest ease and self-assurance.
Writers: Hélène Guirette, specialist in orientation and mobility, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Carole Zabiello, specialist in orientation and mobility, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Narrated by Daniel Hogg. Filmed and edited by André Chapelot. Production vidéo PRAC Inc. Special assistance Pierre R. Chapelot. English translation by Daniel Hogg. Special thanks to Serge Bellil, Daniel Bonin, Pascal Renaud, Sébastien Richer, Pierre Rondeau, Research Coordinator, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Francine Barry, Documentation Technician, Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. Fondation Mira. Cégep Rosemont. Production of this video was made possible through special project funding from the Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille. We wish to thank the organizations, individuals, and users who contributed to this production. Copyright Institut Nazareth et Louis-Braille 2011. All rights reserved. Published by AFB Press, 2 Penn Plaza, New York, New York 10121. To order, visit our website at www.afb.org or call 800-232-3044.